What's up, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, joined by Justis Mosqueda from Acme Packing Company, looking at the Green Bay Packers post first wave of free agency. Justis, the Packers brought in the fewest amount of free agents, new bodies through the door across the league. Only 2 additions at corner and at guard, which I would suggest probably means they're looking to improve from within. That is my working theory at the moment. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean that plus the draft, right? We got 8 draft picks coming in.
Truly.
We've seen, especially in recent years, where the depth chart has been pretty wide open, how quickly some of these guys can make an impact. So I think there's still definitely like wide receiver, defensive end, defensive tackle are probably positions that I think you can maybe get day one impact type of guys in the draft, depending on who they select and how high they go and stuff like that. But yeah, otherwise, for sure. I mean, I thought this was really the offseason of big swings. I think that's kind of the market that the Packers were supposed to be in, other than maybe we brought up like MVS and stuff like that
Sure.
as potential guys. But outside of that, I thought for the most part, like if they were going to add bodies, just because of, I don't want to say how loaded this team is, but like how deep this team is. I think I believe this was before the McDuffie and McManus signing, so it might be up to 48 now.
Right.
But I believe they had 46 guys who are returning from the 53-man roster plus IR, right? So, and that's including like Sean Clifford, which you don't have to include that. He was only up for the playoffs, and I don't think that they're planning on keeping 3 quarterbacks on the active roster.
It would be a
Um,
surprise.
yeah, but you do the math there and you're like, okay, 46 plus 2 McManus and McDuffie, that's 48 plus 2 free agents, you're at 50, and we have 8 draft picks. Wow, there's not a lot of wiggle room
Not a
there,
lot of room
right?
at the end, right? Yeah, and to that point, it's you talk about the roster, and I did want to kind of go through position by position and maybe take a look at where we might see them looking forward as far as, okay, this is where the team expects improvement to come from each of these positions, because I don't think for a moment that this is a team that's going to sit back and rest on, well, we've got it in hand, so to speak, when it comes to additions. To your point, I do think the draft has there's the opportunity is there. Now, so much of it depends on how the board falls, right? But I mean, you don't have to look very far. You go to last year in the Rams and their rookie class. I mean, obviously they hit a pretty significant home run with Verse there in the first round, but even throughout the entirety of their draft, that's a draft class that immediately pumped up their pass rush and their ability there. Now, some of that was schematics. Obviously, the coordinator did a phenomenal job, but I do think a lot of folks are so down on the idea of, oh, just if the only addition is via the draft, this team's not going to be able to rush the passer. Look, I'm myself as a fan certainly able to fall prey to that kind of mindset and mentality. But the more I've looked at it, the more I've thought about it over the course of the last day or so, I'm looking at this roster and thinking, okay, you add a significant, albeit productive piece in the draft. And yeah, there's a bunch of different position groups where you could suddenly be cooking with gas.
Yeah, for sure. And some of it is like moving guys around. I think the defensive interior is a really interesting position when you talk about, can they get better as pass rushers? Devontae Wyatt is probably a top 15 pass rusher from the interior in the NFL. If you look at any of the pressure metrics, it says that. He didn't start a game last year, right? I mean, he was used as a rotational player because the team thought that they could get away with TJ Slayton playing nose tackle on
On
rundowns
early
and
downs, right?
playing Kenny Clark at the 3, which they were able to stop the run, but that grouping could not get after the quarterback. I really do wonder like what the plan is at D tackle. Wouldn't be surprised if they drafted one high. Considering Kenny was a little bit disappointing this past year. Wyatt's on a
Most likely the
contract
final
year.
year, yeah, of his
Um,
deal. Yeah.
I do wonder what they do with Kenny. Do you think he's a 3? Do you think he's a nose? Personally, I'd play him at the nose,
I think
unless
that
you
makes
draft a
all the
guy.
sense in the world, dependent on how the draft falls out, right? Well, let's
And
start there. Let's start at defensive tackle, shall we? Because you make a great point on Wyatt, and the other component with Wyatt though is you're talking about improving from within, right? If
mm,
he can just stay healthy, it will vastly improve not only their numbers, but I think their interior rush because there was, to my count, going back and looking at the season last year, there are at least 3 games where he comes in essentially on a tear early in the game, but then has to leave either for the remainder of the game or for a long stretch due to injury. And if he can just stay on the field, now obviously you can't control injuries, but man, if you can just avoid that kind of snake bite as far as him having to leave the game because of injuries, I think that really helps you, obviously, because of what you're talking about. His presence as a pass rusher was a bit undeniable last year.
yeah, and getting him to play full-time 3 technique would go a long way, right? Kicking Kenny into the nose. I mean, I don't know what they've done with Kenny. It hasn't really made sense with me. I know, he's played nose tackle in a 3-4. He's played D end in a 3-4. Now he's playing 3 technique for the most part in a 4-3. Plays a little like nickel nose type of stuff. I would play him in nose. Like a one gap nose tackle is what I think he's best at. So I don't know why they didn't play him there. I mean, maybe it's because they didn't trust Wyatt as a run defender last season, and they were just like, okay, we're going to throw Slayton and Kenny out there.
I
I
think there's
always
a
make, I
component
always
there,
make,
right?
yeah, I always make this argument that it's like the nose tackle things. You can't give them too much power because it ends up turning like the NBA where we're like, why aren't there any American bigs? And it's because every 7-footer in America is like, no, I want to play the wing. I don't
Oh,
really want to
that's
bang
so good.
heads.
Right.
Um, I do think that there's a little bit of that at nose tackle in the NFL. I'm not just even speaking specifically about Kenny Clark, but like once you get that guy to play 3 technique and he's getting 1-on-ones, he's not going to want to go to
He doesn't want to
nose
go back,
and get
right?
double teamed and do all the dirty work. Like, but that's what he's good at. He's
Right.
330 pounds. Why are
Especially
we
I would
playing that guy 3 tech?
especially I would think in this system in particular where they do ask those guys to like shoot those
Yeah,
gaps.
get
It's
off the
not a
ball.
read and react system where he's trying to two gap. Like they want these guys from every guy on the defensive staff who has talked about this publicly. They want these guys shooting those gaps. And to your point, I think Kenny's a bit wasted at 3. If he is at nose and is able to kind of create havoc along that kind of A gap interior,
Mhm.
I think that would maybe not pump up his numbers. I'm not sitting here saying he's going to be like a 5 or 6 sack guy suddenly, but I do think you'd see a little bit more production and a lot more disruption if you allowed him to do that.
And the other thing too is like, yeah, if Wyatt gets all those 1-on-ones and it's not just in nickel sets, it's when he's against play action, these
Yep.
longer drops and stuff like that. Like,
Yep.
I think that goes a long way too, because Wyatt's getting a lot of this production on like third downs.
Right.
And that's when teams are trying to block it up, right?
Yep.
Weird
Extra
stuff happens in
protection.
play actions.
Guys getting put into chip, guys getting like
Yeah,
slide protection to a certain rusher, usually oftentimes
right.
kind of towards Gary, etc. But like, yeah, I do think the other component here that I wanted to ask you about when we've talked a lot about this and you've heard a lot about it, it's what this class at defensive tackle is very deep, right? There's no
Yeah.
doubt there's a lot of talent on offer. If you are a Carl Brooks or a Colby Wooden, are you a little worried heading into April? Because it sure
Yeah,
feels
dude.
like there's an addition or two coming.
Yeah, I again, I wouldn't be super shocked if they added 2 early on.
Right.
Again, in part because of what the rooms looked like recently. Um, Brooks had a really good rookie year, I thought, and then kind of fell off this past season. Who's to say if there would be room for like if Brooks has a good summer, there would be room for him to stick on the roster as a fifth defensive tackle.
Right.
Wood might not make the team. I wouldn't be shocked if we're talking all those numbers, right? And we're like, all
Yep.
right, we're at 50 plus 8, that's 58. Only 53 make the team. I wouldn't be surprised if Wooden was one of the 5 who didn't come back this upcoming season. Yeah, I mean, I think if the Packers are going to prioritize anything, it would probably be a run stopper in the draft.
Right.
Like at least someone who isn't a Brooks Wooden. Um, I guess even like a Wyatt, like if a guy can kind of play like a Kwan Short type of guy where he can play the 3, he can play the 1. I think that they would still consider that guy with like a high draft pick, but I don't think they're going to go after like a undersized, like 280-pound defensive tackle who just rushes the passer. I just don't think that that's what they want with this room right now, right? I mean, just think about the addition subtraction stuff, right? You didn't add anyone and you lost TJ Slayton,
You
and
lost
TJ Slayton was
Slayton,
kind of
yeah.
your key to stopping the run. So if Wyatt doesn't make that jump, which maybe he can, but you probably want to add competition there, right? If
Absolutely.
you're a betting man, you had down years for Wyatt and Clark relative to what expectations are. Your chances are you're probably going to replace at least one of them, right? So adding competition, even if it's like a first round pick, isn't a bad bet. That guy can be at least a full time starter next season and moving on. So, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of guys. Graham, I don't think he's going to be there.
He's started to. It's interesting because other guys in the draft process are coming to light as far as the media goes. We don't like the guys in the building, obviously, have known this for a while, but it is interesting to see his name get. I'm not down to 23, but it's starting to hover a little lower than it had been. Simply because, Gray Zabel went 16th in DJ's mock today.
Yeah.
That's a name that wasn't even in first round consideration when mock started a couple months ago. So it's just interesting to see that he's starting to fall a little bit towards the Packers. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but
I don't think so. I think people are going to go back to the 2023 tape. I think people are now watching the 2024 stuff.
Right.
Graham battled through a pretty significant injury this entire year. Like he got hurt in camp and kind of played through it. So like it impacted his on the field, but it's not like a long-term health concern from what I understand.
Right.
So I think people are going to go back to the 2023 and then you're going to see him go like 5th overall to the Jags or whatever it is. But there are certain guys. I mean,
right.
Derek Harmon out of Oregon, Go Ducks.
That's the name. That's the name.
Here.
That's the name right there. That's the one. He has future Packer written all over him.
The Michigan guy too, Kenneth Grant. If we're talking about a run stopper, right, who has some athleticism and stuff, like he's another guy who makes a lot of sense. So, I wouldn't be shocked if I don't know what the short list is at this point. The defensive end market is super weird. I don't know if we're going to be looking at a corner in the first round. Like when I look at mock drafts right now, the ones that make the most sense to me, where like I put myself in the position of the Packers, right? I make myself God, no big deal.
As one does.
Yeah, I look at it and I'm like, okay, Egbuka makes a lot of sense. Maybe a McMillan if he falls down enough.
That 40 time, who knows?
Those two defensive tackles that we just talked about, like
right.
I think those are like the 4 that I'm kind of like keeping my eye on right now, and then we'll see what happens at the end. I mean, I have a lot of the end is probably the position that I've seen the most of as far as like the college prospects go.
Let's look at that for a second with the Packers roster as far as talking about improvement from within. I mean, this is a big leap of faith right here, sitting here mid-March, and obviously we've got a whole month to go until the draft actually occurs, and who knows if there might be a move in the Packers' future in that regard. But just looking at what they have on offer, and we've talked about this a lot, so I'm not going to belabor it too much, but I mean, a big component here is LVN taking a serious step forward, right? There's no doubt that that's not the plan, but it's part of the plan. You can't tell me otherwise, right? And clearly, Rashawn Gary, I thought, had a much better second half of the season than he did the first half of the season. But I think he was more productive and better overall than I suspect most fans give him credit for last year.
He definitely went down a tick as a pass rusher. He got so much better as a run defender.
Oh, yes, he did. Yes, he did.
He made a massive jump as a run defender. You did not see any of the like losing
flying past the quarterback, letting the door open on him like that.
That happened for 4 years.
Yes,
people were complaining about that for 4 years, and he got paid, and people were like, "How? What are we going to do with this?" He played much better in that aspect.
Yep, totally agree. The problem is you get paid, and the expectation is you're rushing the passer, and you're getting the quarterback on the ground, and that dried up, especially early in the season, no doubt.
Yeah, the LVN stuff is interesting because I mean, Goot just keeps saying that like they have the bodies. Right?
He does.
I mean, they're like, we like our defensive line. So I'll have to see it. I mean, he can say whatever he wants. There's no way to spin it that, LVN 2 years into his NFL career, you trade away Preston Smith. He hasn't started a game and he's behind Kingsley and Egbari. That's not a good thing. Right.
Nope. It is.
You can make the defensive line coach change. You can do all that stuff. That's still not a good sign. So it'll be interesting. I bet that they, just because of how this class kind of shakes out. I mean, edge rushers go fast though. Like that's the
Yes.
thing. Is like
Yes.
people talk about and they're like, it's a good edge rusher class. They're all going to go top 50.
Yes.
Like it doesn't. If it's a good, it's the same thing with quarterback. You can say, hey, it's a great quarterback class. How many quarterbacks went in the first round last year? Right, 6 of them went in like the top 12. Like if there's 6 quarterbacks, they're all going to go high. Yeah, yes. It's the same thing with edge rusher. Like I'm looking at mocks right now, and is Raku? Is that how you say his name? The kid
from
out of
Boston College. Oh my
like
God,
he's going like 14th overall, and I'm
which
like,
is nuts because I hadn't even heard of this kid like a month ago, and now he's everywhere. It's just funny how the draft process,
we talked about this
season works, right?
The Shamar Stewart guy, right?
Oh
we
yeah,
talked about this before the combine.
You were talking about him being top 5, like what, 2 months ago?
I was like, look, he's gonna get the Trayvon Walker bump
right
as soon as he does.
Who is on the block now?
Yeah, apparently,
which is hilarious.
Yeah, so edge rusher is interesting because I still think that that's a position that, like, if Green Bay really wants to address it, they might have to trade up in the second, like at the latest. Because like guys like Swinson from like LSU, guys like Princely from Mississippi, like they're quality football players, but that's like the end, I think, of like the impact guys.
And to me,
and they might be gone top 50.
That screams a move a la or akin to what they did to get Christian Watson, right?
Where maybe you move down and then you move up.
Yeah, and then exactly. Maybe not quite that dramatically, but it wouldn't surprise me if they are really sold on a guy, right? Like if they think this guy's going to come in and give you something right away, stepping off the bus and adding to your pass rush instantly, they might take that swing. Yeah. That wouldn't surprise me, you know?
Yeah, especially if, again, in that range, I think you're looking at like a pretty specific group of players for the Packers' needs. I think there's going to be defensive tackles in the second round, but if you go D tackle in the first, right, then things start getting really interesting. Where it's like, okay, we need a pass rusher, right, or we need a wide receiver who can beat man coverage as an outside guy.
Yep.
Now we're looking at a pretty specific group of players where you're looking at Swinson, you're looking at Princely, you're looking at wide receivers like Higgins or Ayumanor, right? Yeah. And, you know, once like, you know, if you got 4 names that you really like in the second round and 3 of them go off, now it's time to trade up.
Then right, make exactly. That jump, right? Exactly.
And this is the thing that people don't realize, I don't think. When draft boards leak, which doesn't happen very often, but Jerry Jones does it like every other year.
Every year, apparently.
Yeah. People are always very surprised that these draft boards are only like
thin,
120
very
names
thin.
long.
Yes, correct.
That isn't to say that they haven't graded all these players. There are players who, because of the circumstances of your roster, you don't want to take the medical risk. There are players that, because of the circumstances of your locker room, you don't want to take the character risk, or just as a franchise mentality. I guess it's like the Packers, for example, right? And I don't know what you want to do with the like McManus thing, but when the Wyatt stuff came out, right, and it was like, hey, Wyatt had some stuff in his background. Goot was very, very public about like he never touched a woman because that is something that is important to the Packers franchise.
It's important to him, important to the franchise, important to the program, right? Right. Very much so. Yeah.
So you're ruling off guys for some of those reasons. Some of them, they're not necessarily scheme fits. I know Goot said that he doesn't adjust for scheme fit. I don't believe him. At least like they're gonna grade guys the same way.
He's been saying that for years, and I'm with you. I'm like, okay, I think that's true conceptually, right? But there's certainly information there about what scheme you're running, where what this guy does versus what that guy does well is going to be a better fit for said scheme. That's just human nature.
Like the only teeny tiny offensive lineman we have anymore, which is what they built those McCarthy offensive lines off of, is Zach Tom. Everyone else is big. So
especially now with the arrival of Banks. Holy cow, that guy.
Right. So the board is like 120 players, but the reason for that is so that you can have these conversations like Aaron and I are having, where it's like, okay, if we go D tackle in round 1, these are the 4 players we're really eyeing in rounds 2. 3 of them go off. We have a linear sight on what this thing looks like. It's time to move up. He's number 1 on our board. He's a tier higher than everyone else, right? Like, let's
And that's
go.
the key, right? If you're talking
Right.
about the tiers, and this is the last guy at that tier, and the next guy available on your board is maybe not a chasm wide, but it's a pretty significant drop,
Right.
you know, and you know you're going to be able to get that tier later, like rounds 3, 4, what have you.
That's where it goes.
Where
We don't
it
want to
gets
pick. We don't
it
want to
gets
pick
like
right
this,
now.
the
Right.
talent, you know what I mean? The talent goes like this as far as in relation to each other.
Once that top guy on a tier goes off the board,
Right.
or I guess when you're eyeing it, right? If we're at Aaron, if we're at pick 55,
Right.
and it's pick 54, and there's one guy on the tier left, and there's 20 guys on the next tier, I don't want to pick at 55.
Nope.
Because there's going to be 15 guys left that we think are basically equal. So we got to make that decision at that point. Do we want to move up or do we want to move back? Because what we really don't want to do is be picking in that spot, right?
Yep.
So,
and look, and to get back on the edge rusher thing, I think that's 100% where I see this going. I think a defensive tackle in round 1 is most likely, but then I think the conversation becomes exactly what you're talking about as far as, are they going to value that potential edge rusher, or do they look at Higgins and a possible wide receiver addition? And again, that will come down to what they have on their board. You know, we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, but I'm fascinated to see how that plays out because there are such
specific
needs. You know, this heading into this draft in
Yeah.
a way, it doesn't feel, because of what you were talking about as far as the roster makeup as it stands right now, heading into the draft, man, it's pretty carved out what they need. You know, this is not in these last few years where they've collected 12, 13 picks in these drafts and brought in a ton of young talent to compete during training camp. I think this is a year where I'm not saying they're going to trade away a ton of picks, but I do think the focus is much more laser guided this season. It feels that way anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that if you get into a situation where the Packers are trading out, or not trading out, but trading down out of round 2 specifically, want to be for pick volume, right? I don't think it'd be like a pick swap type of thing. And then I think you start getting into the range of like, all right, we're probably not looking at year 1 impacts. We're looking at, backfilling and trying to get out of some of these contracts. I mean, one of the benefits that big picture.
Yeah.
The cap was stagnant for a long time because of COVID. And that was something that the NFLPA negotiated so that there wasn't just like big old peaks and valleys, right? in the cap when fans weren't in the stands and stuff like that.
Sure.
Over the last 2 years, the cap has gone up over $50 million, and it's expected to continue to rise by about $25 million per year. This has been amazing for teams that want to retain their own players, right? That's why you're seeing free agency end within 2 days.
And I was going to say, and that has directly led to the free agency class, the quality in the free agency classes that we've seen, 100%.
Yes. But at the same time, the Packers are about to get into a pretty unique squeeze at the NFL level. Right. Because the Packers have been making, these like, hey, we're making 10 draft picks a year, draft classes because of the Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Russell Douglas, Preston Smith trades, right? And a lot of these guys are going to end up getting money. I'm actually writing, this will probably be out-ish by the time you post this. I'm trying to find like contract comparisons for guys like Quay Walker, Devontae Wyatt, Dobbs, Rasheed Walker.
Oh yeah.
All those guys are going to get between probably like $13 and $20 million per year. So if the Packers don't have the appetite to pay that, now would probably be a pretty good time to start coming up with some contingency plans.
I mean, this is what Ted did all the time, right? You could set your watch by, look ahead a year or two at the expiring contracts, and you can bet in that draft class coming up, there will be some competition at those positions. Like, zero doubt.
So I think that's the conversation once you get to round 2, right? Are we trading up to get a pass rusher? Are we trading back so that we can cover our asses in the future, add a little bit more competition, get a
Right.
year ahead of it. Like, let's say you draft a tackle in the 3rd round so that he could potentially push Rasheed Walker.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't work for next year. You still don't want to pay Rasheed Walker. At least you had a little bit of competition, and now you can draft a 1st round pick at tackle and have the 1st and 3rd go at it and get a tackle that way, right?
Right. And that's, I mean, precluding the idea of maybe Jordan Morgan actually kicks out the tackle.
Right. I was just throwing a name out there, right?
No, I got you.
Maybe it's, hey, you don't like Walker, Hopper hasn't paid, or you don't want to pay Walker, Quay Walker.
Right.
Hopper hasn't really proved anything.
Right.
Maybe you take a linebacker in the 3rd again and have those two duke it out, so you figure out who you want to play opposite of Edger and Cooper long term, because you don't want to pay Quay significant amount of money, that $15 million per year that like Nick Bolton got. Which if Nick Bolton gets it, Quay's going to get it.
Yep.
Quay's going to get that money, guys.
Yep. Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, the draft
let's
is
look.
really
Let's look at that. Let's look at linebacker, because I think when you talk about the pairing of the potential, or will be at least for this year, the pairing of Walker and Cooper, I could see some real potential there. As far as talking again, improvement.
Quay got better down the stretch. Again, I think it's
much
more
better last year.
The fans are better. The fans are not going to love that contract, and I understand that. Quay's going to get $15 million a year. I need you guys to get that. So
get ready for it.
Quay has been playing better football. If he plays consistent this year, I think he's going to get that money from the Packers.
Well, especially if you pair him with Cooper. I love the idea of the two of them working together, and we never really got to see it last year until basically the playoff game. Essentially, it was like one kind of stretch.
Cooper broke out, and Eric Wilson was having to play Mike and all that stuff. So
if I mean, Eric Wilson, shout out, Packers legend, but I can't handle another 3rd down where he drops just behind the sticks and then makes the tackle at the stick to allow the 1st down. Like, I couldn't.
Or two and Jared Goff just throwing it right behind his head. So
can't handle
those little end cutters.
But you mentioned Hopper too. There's the other component where that's a former 3rd round pick, right? And you've got these two guys who are basically going to be entrenched, and then you bring back Isaiah McDuffie, who's played a lot for you, right? And I think played probably above his head last year for the most part. But there's a familiarity. He's clearly, knows the defense, relationship with Halfley. But this is an area where I suspect they probably don't make a premium pick, obviously, but I wouldn't be surprised if you're sitting there on day 3 and they add something to this room.
Yeah.
For the reason you're talking about. It's like, I don't think the future is set there. I do think they expect most of these dudes, especially Quay and Edgerrin playing together, to improve and take a big jump from their first season together to this season.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of agree with you. I think probably headphones got lost. College football has not produced a bunch of top linebackers, so that the conversation in the 1st round is like not even existent, right? I don't think that they're going to take Jihad Campbell or like Jalen Walker might be a stack linebacker. I think I like him better as a stack linebacker. I know a lot of people talk about him as an edge rusher, and Georgia plays that funky scheme. But I don't really think that that's in play in round 1. Round 2, there's really not that many players even in contention unless you're talking about the UCLA kid, which, I mean, maybe. But yeah, I think around that round 3, round 4 conversation is probably when you start thinking about this. I mean, you got to remember the Packers last year, right? They drafted Bullard, and we were like, all right, they're good at safety. And then they drafted 2 more safeties.
Yes, they did.
And they still had Zane Anderson, who they brought back, right?
And who ended up being the first guy off the bench when they got injured.
And
it was kind of a surprise.
These are key positions on special teams, right? Again, one of the big things that Bisaccia has done is basically eliminate the wide receiver off of special teams outside of being a returner, right? So what does that mean? You got to have a lot of linebackers, you got to have a lot of tight ends, and you got to have a lot of safeties. So the fact that the Packers only have 4 linebackers right now, big old alert going off. Like, they might draft 2 just because of special teams and depth impact, because those guys will find a way on the field faster than a 8th offensive lineman, right?
I can't wait to see Twitter if that happens. But yes, I agree. The potential is definitely there for the reasons you're stating. And then you look at corner. At the moment, Jair Alexander is on the squad, but we don't expect that to continue. They do bring in Nate Hobbs, who is probably going to, at least in base, be opposite Nixon, which I find fascinating because already you're talking about Carrington Valentine as a sub, right? And I thought he played pretty damn well down the stretch last year. But to me, this points to the whole idea of improving from within. Yes, you had to sign Hobbs in free agency, one of your 2 additions, right? But you do that knowing you've got a guy like Valentine who has played already a ton of ball for you and played, like I said, pretty damn well last year. You're already, in my mind, and you asked before, I don't know if I see them drafting a corner in the first. I'm with you for this very reason. Like, not that the addition of Hobbs wipes out the possibility, but I think they've got not just serviceable depth, they've got working depth as far as no matter what Halfley wants to do facing an opponent, he's got the tools right now, sitting here today in March, right? Now, again, maybe they add. I'm not saying that's impossible, but they're sitting in a really good spot. And I do think this is a core that, after their experience last year, everything they had to do dealing with Jair not being there, and then is he going to be there? He's not going to be there. All of that is done, most likely. And I think they're going to be in a much better spot if and when injuries strike and when they have to juggle things dependent on the opponent. I just feel like this, looking at the corner right now, the cornerback position right now, they're in a much better spot than they were last year.
For sure. And the fact that Bullard
is your main slot nickel.
I mean, yeah, you can just like leave him there, right? Because it's not even like last year where you're like, yeah, we think we like Keyshawn in the slot so that we can give Stokes reps on the outside, right?
Lord.
Bullard can be a full-time nickel because if Evan Williams drops, Zane Anderson was not exposed at safety. And when Zane Anderson dropped, Katana Oladapo was not exposed at safety. So, like, you're good at safety depth. You can use Bullard as that full-time nickel. And then if there's several injuries, maybe that's when you see a Keyshawn or a Hobbs move into the slot and you bring Carrington off.
Hobbs is a natural slot in a way Keyshawn never was. You know what I mean? This is what I mean when I talk about the toolbox being kind of full as far as
Keyshawn learned nickel in Green Bay, by the way.
Exactly. That's my point.
A lot of people have brought up like, oh, we're grabbing another Raiders slot corner. They're doing the opposite things. Like their narratives were like they both ended up as outside corners in Green Bay, but their path to it was the opposite way.
Very different.
I do think that like cornerback, so first round, I think it's going to be very hard for that pick to be BPA at cornerback. Just the way that the cornerback board is right now. A lot of these guys are hurt. Jahdae Brown is like the one healthy cornerback in this class whose name isn't Travis Hunter at the top of the draft.
Right.
He seems to be getting pushed up the board consistently
because he's the healthy guy now.
Yeah. Exactly. He was a borderline like first round pick before the combine, and now you're seeing him go like
set
15.
Him on fire. Yeah. No doubt.
So I don't think that like the BPA thing is gonna shake out in a way where it's gonna be corner. So I think they've covered their need at least enough where they don't have to pull that trigger. In the second round, I think things get interesting because that cluster of guys, right? Say you go D tackle first round, the fast big wide receivers end up going before you pick at 53 or whatever. The edge rushers that you really think that can make an impact are gone by 53. Now, if it's like Morrison, the corner from Notre Dame, who's overcoming that hip injury, right?
Right.
Everyone had him as a top 20 pick. Siobhan Revel, right? Another one who, he tore his ACL in practice, non-contact injury. Do you take that? And you're like, look, we're going to get a first round pick in the second round because they're not going to be ready in week 1. And if we don't see instant impact player on the board at 53, don't we just want to take the guy who we think that has a better long-term investment type of thing? Yep. So I think that's in play. I think it's a pretty specific group of cornerbacks, and they're generally the ones who are banged up. But I wouldn't be shocked if they did that in the second round. After the first 2 rounds, the way that this draft class, like the tiers of it shake out, I think you're not looking for instant impact anymore. And, it's pretty much wide open round 3 and beyond to me.
There's one other obvious kind of pathway here for improvement from within at the cornerback spot, and that's Kalen King making a monster jump. Our practice squad king. Man, look,
There are two
crazier
practice
stuff
squad
is
guys who were
happening.
called up before him.
I know.
Justice, we're not here for your facts. All right, we're
praising Kalen King today. That's what we're doing. But you're right. You are absolutely right. Let's flip it around to the offensive side of the ball. And obviously, you're talking about improvement from within. And this is my kind of ongoing narrative this offseason that I will never let go. I'm like a Rottweiler with a bone. I'm going to hold on to this for the rest of the season, offseason, until we get to week 1. This team / offense will be exponentially better this year just from the fact that Jordan Love won't be hurt. And I know it sounds like an excuse. I know it sounds like, everyone's hurt, right? The NFL, that's what, and Jordan himself said this at the Super Bowl. Like, everyone's hurt. You got to get through it. You're judged by what you do between the white lines, and that's all true. But I also know what else is true is the quarterback will be healthy. And he was dealing with multiple injuries that obviously cascaded his season all year long. Just that fact is going to make things better on the offensive side of the ball. I'm not saying he's going to be a magically better player, but man, his output is going to be better. That's just flat out.
Yeah. And I think particularly like the way that he handles pressure could change. I mean, guys, it's real simple. I mean, this is a pretty human I guess observation, right?
Right.
If you're banged up and there's lots of bodies around you, you might not be super confident about being able to perform.
About getting outside the pocket, stepping in,
Right.
up in the pocket, rather than throwing it, say, at the receiver's feet.
Right. Or just chucking it up and just saying, like, I'll give my guy a chance, I guess. Like, what else am I going to do at this point? So, yeah, I mean, I think that's going to help. Receivers really interesting to me. I mean, maybe they look at offensive line. I kind of doubt it'll be in the first 2 rounds again, because I just don't think that the way that this roster is shaped out, right? I mean, you're already having Jordan Morgan, last year's first round pick, compete for playing time. The way we're going, like, at least we're projecting entering the season. So I don't know if you want to hit that position again. Wide receiver is the big one. Again, I think they need big and fast. That is what this team needs more than anything.
I wanted to highlight something you wrote at Acme Packing Company, which I will link to, that I really thought was astute, and you're 100% spot on as far as Jaden Reed's usage, right? To me, and what you highlighted in your post, which is, again, spot on, as far as when they're in 2 wide receiver sets, right? They are not using Jaden Reed. He's not on the field. Like, to me, sitting here on the outside looking in, that has to change. And I understand the reasoning for, okay, we got the 2 big guys, usually on the perimeter, not always, sometimes they're on the same side, but the idea being that they're able to get out in space and block, right, and be big-time components in the run game. Or work off of that downfield into some kind of passing concept. But, man, Jaden Reed is way too talented to be sitting on the sideline for the majority of those snaps. And it's not to say that, he doesn't have his limitations as a smaller guy, a slot. I get all that. But he's talented as hell. And the fact that he's on the sideline for the majority of those snaps is somewhat absurd in my eyes.
It's going to get really weird because the way that this offense works,
right.
Jaden Reed is used. I talked about this a little bit, where it's like people have the hopes that, like, Jaden Reed is going to be this number 1 receiver, and maybe somewhere else he could have been, right?
Yeah.
In this offense, he's playing in the slot at a 75% clip. When the Packers are in 2 wide receiver sets, right? Jaden Reed has 33 snaps total the last 2 years.
2 years.
Bo Milton has 159. Malik Heath has 150. He's playing for every 5 snaps. Bo Milton is playing in 2 receiver sets. Reed is playing 1, and Romeo Dobbs is almost playing 20. Right? Get that in your head right now. So they only want to use him in 11 personnel, right?
Yep.
So it's not going to be the run action stuff. It's going to be 3 wide receiver sets. They only want to play him in the slot. And when he gets man coverage, he's half as efficient as when he sees zone. So he is like one of the best role players in the NFL. But the way the Packers use him and the way the numbers kind of shake out, he's still a role player. And it's How do you value that? Right.
Well, here's
the Packers
here's
offense is working around it right now.
here's the question: does Christian Watson's absence and the potential, we're a ways away yet, but the potential for not being able to fill that void as far as that type, right? We've talked a lot about that here. That's why we talked about DK Metcalf. We talked about a possible MVS reunion, none of which materialized. And we can say they go into the draft with that as a need and or target, but there's every possibility that the draft comes and goes, and that opportunity doesn't present itself. If you're then Matt LaFleur, this is what I said. This is what I'm positing as far as, okay, what are the solutions or what do we have to do? To me, this is a no-brainer as far as, and I understand the perceived limitations of Reed's game. I'm with you. I don't think he's ever going to be a, quote, number one. He's not a Jamar Chase. That's not his gig. But, man, there are so many more ways you could utilize him than they are right now. And I think there may come a point where they're forced to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like, again, Eumanor, Higgins, right? Those are the guys that are probably going to be super popular names. Ibuka, I guess, in the first round.
If he's there. I mean,
right.
Again, we've talked a lot about it, but I'll keep reiterating it. They got to get through a murderer's row of teams that need wide receivers before they get to Green Bay at 23.
Yeah.
And there aren't that many of them.
Yeah. Unfortunately, like, whoever you love, the Chargers kind of have the
Chargers love them too.
Yeah. So
precisely.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's totally a way that this shakes out where, hey, some of these scenarios that we talked about, right? Defensive tackle in the first round, you grab a Harmon or a Grant or whoever. You trade up for a defensive end, a pass rusher. Now you're out of the receiver market. And, maybe you're backfilling, drafting offensive linemen, linebackers, those positions, corner, round 3 and later. And you have to figure it out. And it'll be really interesting. I do wonder if there's the possibility that, like, they make Wicks a full-time outside guy and Reed just still stays in the slot. Like, I think that's on the table too.
That's where we're headed if they don't come out of the draft with somebody. Yeah. I totally see that coming.
So
like that, I'm talking about what I would like them to do, and what I expect them to do is exactly what you're talking about.
Again, it's going to be, if we don't add a field-stretching wide receiver,
right,
who kind of fits Matt's mold, right? These guys who are like 205 and bigger. We're going to find out a lot about the limitations of this Packers receiver group and or what their ceiling is. I don't know if it's going to be good. I don't know if it's going to be bad, but we're going to find out.
We'll also find out about the creativity on the offensive coaching staff. I mean, I'm sorry, there's enough talent there to win. Is it exponentially more difficult without that type on the perimeter? Absolutely. I'm not discounting that. But man, you are professional NFL coaches. Like, there's talent there to be utilized and to work into concepts that should be Marriott, with the play action game, of which we kind of saw the disappearing act last year. I mean, there's ability there. There's production to be had. It'll be tougher. There's no question about it. And the other component here, you're talking about improvement from within, especially on offense. And I did a chat about this a couple of weeks ago, and I know some people scoff just because he's been hurt, but we don't really even know what Luke Musgrave is yet as far as his potential and what he could bring to the offense, not just from a production standpoint, but also from if he can get going at some point, then defensive coordinators have to start worrying about him and have to start playing the offense differently. Up till now, they haven't had to worry about him at all. And I do think he has the potential, at least the potential, to change that kind of dynamic a little bit. Not the way a Watson would, but just from the fact that there's so much untapped there. We don't even know what he is yet.
So here's an interesting proposition. What if they don't know how to play Reed and Musgrave together?
I mean, early returns would suggest that is the case.
Right. I mean, I guess that's my question. Because if their answer is, okay, Musgrave is going to kind of be our field stretcher because of, like, he's not going to run a 4.4, but he's so athletic at that size that it demands a certain kind of presence, right?
Exactly. And as a defensive coordinator, what is your call, right? If you see him on the field and he splits, what are you manning with a safety? Are you making sure that you have a corner over there? Does that change the dynamic for the Packers on offense as far as what they can do? Like,
well, it certainly helps you declare man coverage a lot.
Exactly. Right?
Because are you putting a linebacker out there? Oh, you're not? Well, Reed's now in man coverage against a linebacker. So
Probably with
that
two
helped us out a
go.
lot.
Yes.
That's
correct.
one way to get better against man coverage is by 2 receiver sets or 2 tight end sets.
2 tight end sets, and you have one guy split out, and how do they react to that? I mean, that's what I mean when I talk about Musgrave and a real untapped kind of potential. And I'm not sitting here saying he's going to be a complete game changer or anything like that. But if he can just stay on the field and be productive consistently and be involved, that just changes the calculus.
And I don't even think it's like the productive thing. Like we haven't had the hands issues that like some of the other Packers pass catchers have had. Like it really is just like a health thing. Even back to his days at Oregon State, it's always just been like, can this guy stay healthy? Hopefully, fingers crossed. That would be super cool if we could get a tight end who could do that type of stuff.
Would be super cool. And that's the other kind of question I have looking at this draft too. And I don't suspect this will be even day 1 or 2, but on day 3, I wouldn't be surprised if we added a move tight end, like somebody to do what they thought Josiah DeGuara was going to do. You know what I mean? Like that H-back type. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
I mean, the fact that they didn't bring back John Fitzpatrick yet, at least, I didn't think that he was going to get tendered. I thought they were going to kind of treat him the way they treated Tyler Davis's contract in the past, where he's up for an RFA. It's like $3 million. They're like, so we're not going to do that. But you can hit unrestricted free agency. And if you don't get any other calls, come back with us on a minimum salary.
Team friendly deal. Yep.
They could have done that already. So the fact that they haven't, I think means that they're probably going to go in a different direction, which is interesting. Yeah. Because Tyler Davis is now a free agent. He hasn't cleared the medical stuff.
He's still hurt, quote unquote. Right.
And then Fitzpatrick was actually out snapping Ben Sims, who's the only he's the 3rd tight end on the depth chart right now.
Sims was inactive the playoff game, wasn't he? If I'm remembering.
So John Fitzpatrick really ended up replacing him both on offense and special teams, which again, that tight end role is pretty important on special teams too. So maybe they like a tight end in this class. I don't know.
Possible.
I would be pretty surprised if they didn't add another tight end before undrafted free agency. Be it bringing back like either Fitzpatrick or Davis or drafting a guy. Like they kind of need that 4th body the way that they play special teams, which might be annoying for everyone who wants to roster 8 wide receivers and just roll the dice. But yeah. No one tells me how you're supposed to throw to all these wide receivers.
No, exactly. Practice, but put 7 wide. It's fine. We'll go air raid extraordinaire. The final position group I did want to touch on is running back, because you're talking about improvement from within. I don't know how much more you're going to get out of Josh Jacobs, and that's not to say he won't still be awesome and productive, and he'll be what we saw last year, a continuation of that. Maybe even a tad more productive with Banks in the mix, and maybe they are a little bit more effective up front, passing up or blocking up the run game. But I will say not so much in the Musgrave mold, but the idea that we don't really know what they have in Marshawn Lloyd. As God, the kid could just not stay on the field last year, whether it was during training camp when I was really excited to see him.
Hamstring, the ankle, his appendix exploded. Yeah, all the
guy just could not get on the field. So don't really know what you have there, but the potential for improvement is certainly prevalent. And that's not to take anything away from Emmanuel Wilson or Chris Brooks, who I thought both ran and played very well last year. But he's a little bit of a lottery ticket. You don't really know what you have there, but the potential for an explosive addition, it's significant, I think.
Yeah, from an internal thing, I really don't think that they would even look at the draft. Like that's one of the positions that I think
I agree
they're probably the most set at, just because I think you want to give space for Lloyd to be something, and Emmanuel Wilson is a baseline player enough that I don't think you're in a hurry to try to get better at RB2. At least not by preventing Lloyd that space. And then Brooks came along toward the end of the year. They really started figuring out how to use him. Because a lot of LaFleur's actually running 2-back stuff, right? How many years did we complain that all they did was run that little bubble out of the backfield?
Right.
And really the start of the season, they weren't using two backs in that set, right? It was Reed in the backfield and Jacobs. But
More
then
often than not, yeah.
because Brooks is a good enough blocker, they started using him as kind of like a fullback, basically, from that split back gun set, and they were able to give the ball to Jacobs. So I think Brooks has, like, as the RB4, like, still might have a chance to make it on the team
I
because
think
he
he's
does
definitely
something
got a
for
shot.
you.
Yes, totally
Yeah.
agree.
So once you're 4 deep at running back, I just don't. Especially with the contracts that they have, they're not paying Brooks anything. They're not paying Wilson
Right.
anything. Jacobs has 3 more years on this deal. Marshawn Lloyd has 3 more years on this deal. They're not going to add anyone in the draft, but yeah, it would be.
I wouldn't be
pretty
surprised
cool if Lloyd got good.
if he got good. And then undrafted free agency is a legit possibility, I think, only because the depth at the running back class this year is significant, and I do think, because I get all the running backs are back because these amazing backs switched, teams and had productive years. Everyone's talking about, people are valuing running backs again. I still think you're going to see plenty of backs fall to not only day 3, but into the undrafted realm. And I suspect Packers will probably swipe one up. I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah, I don't think the over talent at running back is going to fix itself anytime soon. These glory hogs want the ball, right? It doesn't matter how much they want to get paid. They're growing up. They want to run the ball in high school. They want to run the ball in college, and then they just end up at running back in the pros. So Derrick Henry probably could have been a hell of a linebacker, but he wanted to touch the rock.
Toting the rock,
That's
man.
what they want. Yeah, it also doesn't help that, like, I mean, just the juxtaposition of, like, Tutu Atwell gets $10 million a year, and then Saquon Barkley gets like 12.
Right. And then what are their
What are we
respective
doing?
roles, and what are they
What
what
are we
their
doing?
teams?
What are we doing? What are we doing? I understand
know.
every running back isn't Saquon. I get that. I fully
Right.
understand that. What are we doing? I
But
think
it
Derrick
sure-
Henry got something like 10 too. So
It
like,
sure tells you how the view. That's my point, though. That's how the league views the position, and that's why I think, despite all this talent at running back coming into this draft, plenty of them are going to be there on day 3, if not undrafted. And
yeah,
then
and it seems like
you make
some
your
of them are
pitch.
going to go pretty high. I've seen people say that, like, I haven't seen the kid, the Omarion Hampton, the kid out of UNC.
Right.
But they're like, he might be RB2 and come off the board like top 12.
And I don't doubt that that's a possibility. And like Genty, of course, is being talked about as a top 10 pick, maybe potentially, which
I
is
love him so
insane. But
much.
also, I love his game. Yeah, I'm right there with you. But like, we all know they're not. There's going to be 1 or 2, maybe 3, possibly taken like in premium with premium selections. But for the most part, people are going to wait till day 3. That's just what they're going to do. That is just because of the nature of the position we were just talking about. As contracts goes, you don't. For whatever reason, to your point, I don't know what we're doing here, but that's how the league views the position still, despite all the stuff we heard this year about the running back is back. Like, it's just not.
Hey, man, these guys are going to turn 30 years old eventually. And then you're going to have to put them in the dirt 6 feet under. How dare you? You can't give them a dime, man. They're going to be 30 one day.
Oh, my gosh. What is that? Here comes the aging veteran. He's ancient. He's 30 years old. My God. Don't ever get old, Justis. Don't do it. Always appreciate the time, man. Make sure you're checking out Justis's stuff at Acme Packing Company. Like I said, there'll be a link in the description of this video. Justis, I'll talk to you next week, man.
Yes, sir.